My name is Manikkalingam, and I work for an organization called the Dialogue Advisory Group in Amsterdam. We facilitate dialogue to reduce violence in different parts of the world. And oddly enough, you Europeans might be surprised to hear this, much of our work is in Europe. And we work with two violent nationalist groups in Europe. We work with the Basque separatist armed group ETA, and we work with dissident Republicans, paramilitaries in Northern Ireland. We talk to them all the time. ETA is the one of the longest surviving armed groups in the world. It's been functioning for more than 50 years. They're fighting for a separate state within Spain, in the Basque country. And they did this with bombings, killings, assassinations of many people, including people who are on the left and progressives too. For the last 3 years, ETA has been in a ceasefire. And we set up a commission to monitor this ceasefire. We meet with them, we discuss the issues around the ceasefire, and over the last year, we've been trying to persuade ETA to begin a process of disarming, getting rid of their guns. It's amazing that in advanced Europe, Western Europe, there is a place where you have people with serious explosives, guns, and weapons. Early in February this year, in an undisclosed location in Europe, I was there with the former South African defense minister and former intelligence chief of the armed wing of African National Congress, observing and verifying ETA's first step in sealing these weapons. It was controversial. There was criticism in Spain that we were supporting, facilitating, giving propaganda to an armed group, a terrorist group as they call it. But we thought it was worth doing. And we hope that in a short period, ETA will begin a process of disarmament and getting rid of all of their guns, weapons, and explosives. We also work with another violent nationalist group. These are the groups in Northern Ireland that have rejected the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement was signed about almost 20 years ago now, and the main Irish Republican paramilitary group, the IRA, accepted this agreement and gave up its guns. But other groups rejected this, and they said this is a sellout, we're not going to be part of it, and we will continue to bomb and kill. Now, this is a new phenomenon, this dissident Republicans. It's a post-Good Friday Agreement phenomenon, but it's also a very old phenomenon, because when you talk to them, they draw their tradition from what they call 500 years of resistance to English imperialism. The English began their imperialism by going after their neighbors, and Ireland was a convenient neighbor and easy to go after. We, 4 years ago, first negotiated and then observed the destruction of weapons of one of these paramilitary groups. And since then, we've been working in the main maximum security prison in Northern Ireland, helping these groups talk to the prison authorities around prison conditions. We're lucky we have interesting work. We have a dynamic group of young people, mostly women. Women are better at collaborating and listening. And they're from Africa, Asia, North America, and even Australia. We have fun in our work. We enjoy it. We meet interesting people. You get to see guns actually destroyed, which is unique and unusual. And in small communities in Europe that those of us here, or many people here, would not even have heard of or not even be concerned about, we can see the change. We can see, for example, activists, politicians no longer going with bodyguards. We can see that suddenly the whole bodyguard industry in Spain was not happy because the security industry was no longer needed. And we can see these changes as we do our work, and it's wonderful to see it. And maybe there's a question of what is this and how does our work relate to dealing with nationalisms and xenophobia or countering it in Europe more generally. And I thought the best way to do it is simply say how we think about our work, or at least what we think we do in our work. How do we engage these groups? Well, we make a distinction between the group's goals and their methods. It's, I think, a very important distinction. People tend to conflate the two. And when they see people with particular goals engaging in very harsh and nasty methods, they condemn both the goals and the methods. But we think these goals are eminently distinguishable from the methods. And by the way, this mistake is made not only by people condemning the groups, but also by the groups themselves. They think, well, we pursue these methods only by violent means. And what we say is, look, extremism, quote unquote, is different from violent extremism. Indeed, we even like extremism. We think, for us, extremists are good. Why? Extremists are 50-50. 50% of extremists might be heading towards violence, but 50% may not be. And in each person, there's two positions. And it's not just a numbers thing, it's an individual thing as well. And so we ourselves can't argue with those who are in the extremely violent camp, but we can talk to the extremists who are in the non-violent camp. They share the ideology, the feelings, the thinking, the experiences of the extremists who are engaging in violence. We don't. We're outsiders. And people say, what do you know? Why should we listen to you? So we like extremists. They help us. Indeed, in the case of ETA, for example, it was the radical Basque nationalists who pushed ETA and said, listen, enough. The violence is not helping us. We're not making progress. We want to stick to our goals, but try something else. The second distinction we make, or the second way we approach our work, is we make a distinction between the sin and the sinner. It's a biblical distinction. In our private lives, it's very hard to make, but in a political context, it's easier to. You think more analytically and clearly. And what do I mean by this is we are harsh and blunt in our condemnation of actions, killings, murder, extortion, threats, intimidation. We really don't censor ourselves. We state it exactly as we see it. But we never condemn the person, the sinner. We stay away from that because we believe that people can change. And we believe that actually people engaged in political violence are easier to change than those who are engaged in other forms of violence because if they see and if you can argue with them, they can shift. And so this distinction is important to us. And we are trying to understand, not to judge them, and then try to move them in a different direction. Finally, why do people listen to us? I mean, who are we? I mean, we're nobodies. We're irrelevant. We're weak. And I always say that our strength is our weakness. If they're talking to the UN, you're scared that the UN Security Council might have sanctions against you. The European Union might put you on a terrorism list. We have no money to give them or diplomatic status to grant them. We don't. But they still, and if you're talking to the US, you're afraid that if you do something the US doesn't like, they may bomb you. So you decide, well, we'd rather talk to this irrelevant, weak set of organization and express our views and speak in a way that allows us to say exactly what we're thinking, even though we have no strength, really, to bring any military power or political power or money power to bear on that. Sometimes I feel like we're like therapists who are providing a place where somebody can unburden themselves. And we find this even with the most hardened military leaders. Finally, we think that dialogue is radical. Dialogue is not a conservative, weak, wimpy solution. Dialogue is radical. In a world where governments and states, and also armed groups, are reaching for their drones before they send out their diplomats, and both fail as a result, we say, well, why don't you try dialogue? Why don't you try talking and persuading? And there's really no reason why you shouldn't. Well, let me hand it over to the panel now, who will speak about nonviolent nationalisms, and maybe we'll have an interaction and find out if there's any connection or not between the two. Thank you very much.